And now I'd like to introduce Jacob Bruno, who is Executive Vice President of Learning and Improvement Services at NWEA. And he's going to say a few words about this book, which is a co-publication between Corwin, NWEA, and Learning Forward.
Thank you, Margaret, and welcome everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to be part of the welcome team here as you've come to learn from two of the brightest educators and leaders that I know. I'll say from the beginning, Corwin, NWEA, Learning Forward, three strong organizations that put the value, put our value and our import on helping teachers do their important work better. I can't think of a better publication, a better book for you to dig into this year than the one that you're about to hear about from Piper and Lindsay. Through a lot of hard work, a lot of sleeves rolled up, working side by side with educators over the last several years and really their whole careers, coalescing in this book that'll help all of us find that balance, that well-being, and those habits that can drive us forward. So really just thank you on behalf of all of these organizations as you lean in and continue to invest in your own work. So without further ado, Margaret, I'll pass it right back to you.
Thanks, Jacob. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Lindsay, Prendergast, and Piper Lee have collectively been working in education for over 4 decades. Today, when not immersed in coaching district and school educators around powerful practices to elevate student learning, they can be found spending their evening hours brainstorming ways to help teachers and leaders do their best work for students. Over the past nearly 3 years, Piper and Lindsay conducted hundreds of hours of instructional rounds with educators of all levels, and the book they will share today is not only the synthesis of these observations, but a message of hope for those remaining in the classroom. As veteran educators themselves, who now have the privilege to support districts and schools around the country through their work with NWEA and the Danielson Group, Piper and Lindsay are excited to share habits of resilient educators, strategies for thriving during times of anxiety, doubt, and constant change with educators everywhere, and offer practical, proven, simple habits that may fuel educators' well-being and impact for many years to come. And now I will turn it over to Lindsay and Piper.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, and welcome everyone from around the world tonight or today, wherever your time zone may be. We're going to start off with a video to get your ideas flowing, having you thinking about your work as an educator as you watch our friend navigate this journey.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that video as much as we do. We have been working alongside educators like some of our friends had shared with us earlier today. And so when we watched this video ourselves, we have had a lot of chuckles because we really related to it ourselves as we went back into the education field after COVID. So I wanted you just to think here for a moment, how does this video reflect the experiences of being an educator over the past several years? And as you make those connections like we did, I'm going to have you just drop in the chat, how does this video, how are you connecting with it? So I'll give you just a minute. Yes, learning to navigate all the challenges and be resilient. Trusting the process.
Some of us are relating to the challenges of that experience, survival, unknown outcomes, the blindfold, trial by
Balancing the unknown. Yes.
I see a lot of trust in there. Yes. Never knowing what's coming
Transparency.
forward,
Yeah.
going. I'd rather be in the dog's position than back in the pandemic shutdowns. That says volumes.
It does. Just trying to hang on. And I think I really relate to that because I think every year or even every week, I'm like, it's gonna get better. I'm gonna find my way a little bit better. And it just seems to be a lot coming at us still.
So it sounds to me like most of our visitors today, like us, watched that video and really thought back to some of those experiences they've had in education over the past few years. And we bring this to you as we start the conversation today, which today is the start of a conversation with you. We're so glad you're here. We're sharing learning intentions with you today, and we invite you to take a moment and look at these, and to yourself, no need to respond in chat. Pull something out of these intentions that connects to your current work, to whatever role you may have in the field of education. Every one of us plays a part in driving towards student success. I'll leave you with a moment to read these to yourself on the screen, thinking about what you hope to learn today and being intentional about that learning experience as you set aside the distractions of the day, the cell phone, the knowing that there's things that you really should and need to be attending to right now, but giving yourself this gift of an hour of time to reflect, connect with other educators. I see a comment here, every day is a new day, and I love that. Let's situate that in that optimism that we're here today to learn about how we're putting this all together, to learn from, to grow together. We've situated a series of habits that we're going to share with you today, and our hope is that you leave with a better understanding of habits that this particular book has put together in a framework. When you apply them with consistency, they're going to give you more confidence, improved well-being, the ability to create bandwidth, mental bandwidth, if you will, to manage change and ultimately support your efficacy as an educator. We're going to zero in on two of the specific habits today too. And one of those is around data, using data to drive decisions, which you may say, yeah, that checks out. I do that probably every minute of every day. But let's think about that today as a habit where we hope that you will be walking away with a better understanding of specific practices that really help you streamline that process and supporting high expectations for all. And finally, navigating negativity. Piper's going to take you on a journey through what we likely experience in some form or fashion most every day of the week. So how do we navigate that piece? How do we ourselves become proactively practicing that resiliency? What does that mean to sustain our own personal well-being and withstanding those external influences that are always going to be there? There's always going to be tightropes. And putting all of that into work, Piper's going to share with you a little bit about why we're here. You're on mute, my dear.
Well, that is not a surprise to you, Lindsay, is it? That's one of my
There's gonna be a
famous
webinar
tricks.
without it.
I know, right? So I think about the video with the dog, and that is not the first time the dog has been on those ropes. Clearly, the dog has practiced, and it's not the first time, or they wouldn't be able to get up on those ropes and do what he did, right? So when we think about habits, they help us in those times that maybe we're in cognitive overload. And I don't know about you guys, but I have a lot of life coming at me. And so showing up and being my very best at work really means I've had to develop some research-based habits in order to show up and be on my A game every single day. So that is really at the root of why these habits. One of the things that Lindsay mentioned earlier is around efficacy. A lot of us have heard the word efficacy thanks to John Hattie and his work. But I just want to help to clarify, because as we navigate the chapters in our book and the habits, I like to just define what are we talking about when we think about efficacy. So we have it here. It's to believe in their ability to impact student performance. So when we have habits in place, it actually helps our own efficacy because we're managing all sorts of crazy things coming at us, just like that dog did on those ropes. And so, in order to maintain that self-efficacy, we know that habits help us with that mental bandwidth that every single one of us deals with every single day.
So, what do habits have to do with good teaching? You might think, well, I have habits, I have routines, I have procedures in my classroom. The book dives into those in a little more specificity. But you may have experienced, as we have, at some point over your career, not just the pandemic, but any point in your career, someone said during a tough time, hey, you know what? Just buck up. Let's go. You can do this. Put your nose to the grindstone and carry on. And in some capacity, we may have been led to believe that that's the definition of resilience. If I can just tolerate the challenges that I face, if I can just muscle through and be strong and persevere, I'm resilient. And we argue that resilience is more than just accepting inevitable challenges. In order to really develop resilience, to be mentally strong and experience that bandwidth that enables us to navigate the complex work of teaching, we need to be intentional about practicing specific habits of practice, both personally and professionally, that help us cultivate that as a true feeling of thriving, not just surviving. So we dig into these habits that we have derived as existing known practices, proven in many cases by research, but synthesized through our collective observations of teaching practice over hundreds of hours in classrooms, side by side with leaders. These are practices that are not isolated to only teachers. They're phenomenal practices for anyone in education. But they really draw that connection between adult SEL or adult well-being and student well-being as well. So navigating these precarious situations that I think you'll all agree with me, we will say are not going away. You may have also had the good fortune to read a wonderful book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. And if you haven't, I highly recommend you do. It's a separate book from education, but it's so applicable. And a quote that really stands out to us as an investment in ourselves is habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. The more we practice them, the better we get at what we're striving for as a personal development goal or a professional growth goal. So again, thank you for being here and taking this time to invest in yourself. So I'm going to invite you now, think about your own work as an educator. Perhaps you have experience in subconsciously developing habits, or you know of habits that you know have helped you be more effective and be resilient in your field. What do habits help you to do as an educator? And I'm going to drop a line in the chat simply to leave a little bit of distinction between the two subjects. But I'll invite you again to engage in chat. Just a small reminder, most of you've done this, but we hope that everybody can enjoy your responses. So you may need to switch to share it to everyone so that they can all see your answers. And great responses coming on. Keep on track and sane. Agreed. They're the practices that are in the back of your mind you don't have to think about, right? Lessen the cognitive load of decision making, 100%. Organization. Habits give me a sense of control, which I definitely need when times are challenging. Fantastic. Keep those responses coming. Thank you.
I love the one, Lindsay, that says, gives me confidence, right? And I think that goes right back to that efficacy. When we have those habits, we feel more confident and more prepared, and that really impacts our own self-efficacy.
Perfect. 100%. Oh, I like some of these examples too. Keep them coming and enjoy those, friends. We're going to share with you an overview of the chapters in the book that are each designated around one habit, highlighting the fact that these are all interconnected. They make an opportunity here for you to practice them or read about them or learn about them and practice applying them as individual habits, but they're best served for you as a professional growth tool when you recognize the interconnectivity between them. So as you see on the screen, sharing here the chapters themselves around the 9 habits. There are 10 listed, and we say that 10th habit is really the collective goal of all of this, is that development intentionally around resilience. So we think about starting off with purpose. Perhaps you've not considered that purpose and considering your purpose is really a habit that you can and should work around, but it's a journey. It's not an isolated single point destination. We talk about collaboration, setting high expectations for all, and the all encompasses ourselves, our fellow educators, and our students. Data to drive decisions, we're driving into that a little bit today. Procedures and routines, goal setting, getting and using feedback effectively is looking at the art of seeking feedback, not solely giving or receiving it necessarily from a supervisor, for instance. Prioritization, avoiding negativity, and ultimately pulling it all together with resilience. So again, we're only going to have time today to share a snippet, if you will, of some specific activities for 2, but know that within the book, when that comes to you, are far more authentic examples, very practical activities, guides, templates, even little personal accountability journals, if you will, that are set up to guide you in practicing the habits themselves. As I mentioned, we're going to dig in now to 2 of the habits, and we're going to start with habit number 4, using data to drive decisions. So thinking about data, I would guess that if any of you were in a school prior to this webinar, at some point in your day, you encountered data, and you're thinking, Lindsay, yes, data is a part of our lives. How does this look? We're always overwhelmed. We're consumed by the amount of data. We know the phrase, we're data-rich, information poor. We have asked ourselves as we design this chapter, how do we distill this into simple, practical strategies, practices that help educators make that habit of using data that becomes so rote, so in your blood, if you will, that again, it frees up that cognitive space in your mind to focus on then in turn, how you're using that data in the classroom and putting it into practice with instruction with your students. So we dig into what to collect, when to collect it, what purpose it should serve. There's often, I feel like, a lot of ambiguity around what purpose we think data should serve and what it actually can serve. We're going to look at data and collaborative inquiry cycles, and perhaps one of the most important pieces of this chapter is strategies for engaging students in themselves in collecting their own learning evidence and becoming a partner in your journey around improving your skills and habit of collecting data. So one more opportunity here, thinking about your own use of data. We're going to consider a metaphor. Looking at the screen, you see a map of a treasure map, hidden treasure. I'm going to share this phrase, and I'd like you to finish it in chat. What comes to mind for you? Data use is like a treasure hunt because, and I'm going to draw a line in the chat and gather your thoughts there. Data use is like a treasure hunt because there are always surprises. Yes, Ashley. Great. You never know what you'll find. Always awaiting to be discovered. Helps guide you toward your goal. I love it. Many starting points, all leading in the same direction. The path may not be where you think it is. I love that kind of curious mindset that you have. Thank you. Karen is pointing out that data is always changing. Absolutely. It can be misleading, take you on side paths and different journeys. I'm so glad you are engaging in that question. That's one of my favorite phrases. Let's go on a treasure hunt, not a witch hunt, when we think of data. So as we ground this work, thinking about data use as a habit that becomes so routine in our daily practice, we need to frame a mindset around this. So the chapters in the book is describing for you understanding around effective data use is going to be grounded in or connected to or really driven towards established learning goals or expectations that are clear to both the educator and the students. Effective data use as a habit needs to be built upon or predicated around a process that we understand and apply consistently to make meaning from that information, that it's not simply a number or a statistic. Effective data use as a habit many of you've mentioned things in your chat responses already, that you approach this with a mindset of curiosity and inquiry. So we're looking at data in a state of wondering. We're not arriving with professional judgment. I love this quote from a colleague that many of you may have heard of, Laura Lipton, but learning occurs when we shift from professional certainty to intellectual curiosity. And I'll highlight there too the connection to another habit around data is best when used collaboratively. Now, data on that other side here is not only used to evaluate completed activities, assessments, or actions, so that we shift away from the practice of looking at it as they say a postmortem or an autopsy. Effective data use is not done without intentionality or purpose. We come with a reason. What are we looking for in that inquiry mindset? And finally, we need to practice that art, if you will, of understanding that data is not going to be based on affirming an assumption that we have or perpetuating existing belief systems. That I find myself, I have learned the most about in my career as an educator is the skill of not coming to a judgment before I examine that data. Taking a look at the screen, I'm going to call out another comment here I just love in the chat. The search is often more valuable than the treasure. Beautiful. And thinking of that exact quote there too, thinking about your own classroom, your own school, the students that you work with in any capacity. Maybe at some point you have heard a comment from a colleague. Maybe at some point you have said something like this, because these are all things I have said. They are all things that may have crossed my mind as I looked at my students and made a generalization based on largely assumptions. I'm in a group discussion. I said, oh, those are just my low babies. Or that generalization, my class is just really behind this year. About a student that I see regularly showing up differently than I had hoped when we're doing activities in class, that she just always gives up. I just can't get her to do it. Or there's no way my kids can do that assignment. So thinking about these assumptions and where they may have shown up in experiences you have had, we're going to connect these to bias. We could do an entirely separate webinar on the influence of bias on data, but grounding some of the activities that we're going to share with you from the book in a moment, think about bias and its connection to those statements that I just shared with you. A few types of bias that we elaborate on in the chapter: confirmation bias. As an educator or a human, I will say, perhaps we search for or we interpret or recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. So as an educator, in that statement that I thought, she just gives up. Well, that may have confirmed something that I had already predetermined as a judgment of that student. And that behavior then confirms it for me, so I continue to believe it without seeking data to prove it or disprove it. And affinity bias. I'm very guilty of this, I will admit, particularly as I shifted into my career as a leader, my tendency to prefer others who share similar qualities to myself. And I found myself more drawn to staff, teachers, those that worked in my school who behaved similarly to me, who were drawn to similar interests as me as well. And I may have shown more of an affinity towards them. And finally, attribution bias. The tendency to attribute something problematic or challenging about a student or another individual as inherently part of their personality. And I think about this when I think about my students in my special education classroom. I think about it when I hear my colleagues who have children of their own say, yeah, I think he's just lazy. He's not going to do that. And we think that that's something that's inherently part of their personality without seeking the data to prove or disprove it. So thank you for those of you that are sharing in chat now, and we'll continue that share. So looking at the biases on the screen, think about a real world example that you have observed, personally experienced in some capacity. How might one of those biases show up in a classroom? Patricia, I love that. It might show up in the patterns of who is called on the most in a class. So I think about an affinity bias. If I know a student is likely to be ready with the answer because they typically are, and they're a student that I have a good relationship with them, I might always call on them. I'm drawn to them by that affinity. And then I unconsciously or subconsciously eliminate the opportunity for others to show me their learning or to certify understanding of where they are in their learning journey. Not calling on the special ed student, for example, who we are willing to give verbal encouragement to. Attribution bias. Other teachers share what they know about certain students. That's a great point. We're at risk for that. We hear that information and then we assign it as it must be true. Phenomenal. Thank you. I hope you enjoy seeing those responses and just giving you a snapshot into data as a bias buster. This is the biggest meat of the chapter on making data use a habit, is unpacking specific skills and practices that you can put into practice yourself. You can put them into practice tomorrow if you want to. Working with a coach on getting better and better at them. But we're going to go through a brief overview of what you might shift from and shift towards. When we think about bias busting, converting assumptions to evidence, gathering learner context, engaging in collaborative inquiry cycles, conducting a data inventory, and finally, go on a treasure hunt, not a witch hunt, for those powerful practices. So a snapshot of what these might look like in practice. If I inadvertently or subconsciously am making judgments or assumptions without evidence. Maybe I made a generalist observation. I have a new student. I said, my new student just doesn't want to participate in any group discussions. It's a natural thought. Then I derive an assumption from it that they're unprepared or they don't understand the topic. And that leads me to act, only of replacing the student with other quiet students where I think they might be comfortable, or I lower the expectation level of the questions that I ask the student because I perceive that they're not prepared. Maybe I even go so far as to deduct points for their lack of participation. So how do we shift this practice? We gather data, we gather evidence. And an example of a source of evidence would be to compare other learning evidence sources that we may have that prove or disprove our perception or our assumption that that student may or may not understand the topic that we're asking them to discuss in the group. Or we offer the whole class, not simply singling out the student. We offer the whole class a survey around their learning experiences in the classroom to understand the group dynamics. Another practice, shifting from where we are going to be gathering learner context to inform instructional planning, away from simply only using monocultural learning resources where we don't attend to students' lived experiences when we develop instructional plans. Think about situating yourself in their experience, what that's like to only receive that type of instruction. We want to shift towards gathering data so that we make informed decisions. And that data might be in the form of funds of knowledge from family surveys, not just our students, but their families as well. Conducting interest inventories and gathering that information, synthesizing it to inform our instructional planning so that we do attend to those lived experiences. Another practice, engaging in collaborative inquiry cycles. This ties into something Piper's going to share with you shortly as well. And this chapter digs into this more deeply. So we want to move away from a common practice, which might be only ever looking at data sets alone in isolation, where we are inherently at our own minds at risk for that bias, misinterpretation, blind spots. We want to move towards receiving the data, suspending judgment, and collaborating with colleagues in a series of experiences around conducting powerful predictions, generating multiple theories of causation so that we generate the expertise of the entire group and we're no longer at risk for those pieces around bias and blind spots. Another practice, conducting a data inventory. Because of our bias, because of our existing habits and patterns, we need to break those habits and shift around to thinking we might be at risk for always only using the same types of data to answer our questions. It's a habit. So now let's shift towards documenting all sources of data that we currently use, best done collaboratively, I might add. Then let's compare and understand what are the purposes of each of those different data sources, and am I answering all the questions that I want them to answer? Where are my gaps? Where's my data desert? Not my data dessert, as I like to think of that word, my data desert. And we're going to replenish those data deserts with more sources of information so we can have a comprehensive understanding and response to the questions that we're asking. And finally, you've now known my favorite phrase, go on a treasure hunt, not a witch hunt. We may be at risk for commonly zeroing in on broad summative trends, a unit assessment, for instance. And when we do that, naturally, or just by practice and habit, we only zero in on the data from the very lowest achievement levels. And maybe that shifts our mindset, it shifts our emotions and that response to the data. Absolutely, we want to be looking at those data sources. However, you're going to hear my friend Piper regularly talk about positive outliers and powerful practices. Where do we get on that treasure hunt? Let's make sure that in that habit of looking at data, we're always selecting at least one positive outlier. Get curious, seek to understand what are those powerful practices that resulted in that data set. And finally, those are all practices that expand in the chapter, but you can put them into practice tomorrow. Data serves all of these habits. So as a crosswalk here, thinking about how effective data use empowers you, the educator, for example, to ensure you're delivering on that intention to uphold high expectations for every single student. You can put data to work for yourself, zeroing in on growth areas where you can gather feedback from peers and colleagues and supervisors. You can use data to determine personal goals for growth and for student growth. Both of you are going to benefit from that. And finally, data is going to help you look at cultivating optimism in times of discouragement and frustration. When we are at risk for always zeroing in on what's going wrong, data tells us there are treasures.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And it's true. And I think this is where the habits kind of they coincide, right? Because when we think about going on a treasure hunt instead of a witch hunt, or we're looking at data and we're thinking about where are those positive outliers, it's really about a mindset. And we can get down a negative track really quickly. And so that's where the data and the habit number 9 are going to intersect. So avoid the negativity. So the next chapter or habit we're going to dive into really is sitting around negativity. Now, I'm not talking about the negativity like we've had a bad day. And maybe, I've called Lindsay and been like, oh my goodness, this crazy thing happened today. But it's a pattern, right, of negativity. We probably all have somebody that we've avoided in our work path or even personal paths, that because it's just always that negative talk. So that's really what we're talking about when we're thinking about avoiding the negativity. Now, when we dove into the research, it was quite interesting to me because over and over again, the term that came up around this was negative Nellies or Neds. And so there's actually terminology, vocabulary to identify that. So that's that negative Nelly or Ned. I did kind of like that they had both the Nelly and Ned. Cracked me up. Just one moment here. So in the chapters, you'll see will help to define some of the language around the habit. So we talk about what things are and are not in each chapter. So what is and is not a negative Nelly or Ned? So negative Nellies and Neds do back channel and triangulate with others and talk about others in their absence. They do have armored personalities and seem unapproachable and easily find fault in others. Often they are right about everything. So finding the fault in others is part of that negative Nelly or Ned attribute. They do frequently blame others and really reflect on the impact their negativity has on the team or on their classroom. They are not those who ensure all voices are heard, seen, and valued. They do not focus conversations on facts and seek all perspectives. So you can see very clearly here how the data or looking at evidence in conversations, like Lindsay just shared with us, that habit really does intersect, because we want to keep thinking about evidence when we interact with negative Nellies and Neds, not basically on gossip. They are not highly reflective and do not seek to improve the culture of the team and overall school. A lot of times when I've heard negative Nellies or Neds myself, I've heard the district or the admin team or the leadership or that person, those kind of things. So it's not, they are definitely not contributing to the positive culture of their team or school. All right, so with that, I know we've all had experiences. We're going to dive right into one of the activities in this chapter. We've all had experiences in a terrible team meeting or a toxic team. So maybe it's in a professional learning community or a planning meeting, and we have physical, emotional, or mental responses. So Lindsay, if you would put a line in our chat box.
Yep.
And I'm going to invite you to first reflect on, what do you recognize physically has happened to you in a toxic or terrible team meeting? Go ahead and drop those in the chat.
Heart rate increases, body temp rises, get a knot in your
Headache,
stomach.
glaze over, yeah. Stomach, avoidance, anxiety, yes. Tension all over your body. While you're dropping those in, I know something that I do physically, and it's my dead giveaway that I am under stress. You will think that I look like a duck swimming on the top, because I might appear to you like I'm super calm. But the reality is my toes are curled up inside my boots or stilettos as tight as can be, just like a fist inside my shoes. And so that is my own physical response that I've recognized, like, ooh, something has triggered you and you are having a stress response to this meeting. And it is my physical awareness that I need to like pause and think about how I'm going to regain myself before I start circling the drain. So with that, some of you also put in some emotional responses. So did you notice someone was angry or sad or fragile? Like, what are those emotional responses that you might have? I love it. Julie says her toes do the same thing, right? So when we actually pause and notice, like, what are those things? I know a lot of people pick their face or their hair, or they get blotchy on the neck, right? Like there's actually a lot of physical responses. I want you to stop and think about, what are those emotional responses or even mental? So for me, I'll lose all creativity. If my toes are in a knot, you have just lost my creativity. And one of the gifts that I might bring to a team is I'm very creative, I think, outside of the box. And so I will shut down. I'm no longer going to be creative. And so that mental piece of me is in kind of a fight, flight, or freeze space, right? So what are those things that you do mentally or emotionally after you've noticed, oops, somebody is clenching their jaw? You're going to have a little TMJ later if you've been in those stressful meetings, right? So we know that those toxic team meetings really are impacting our health. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. And that's been something I've been reading, and I cannot believe how true it is that our bodies really do keep score of what's going on in our life. Avoid and ignore? Absolutely. All right.
The word shut down, Piper.
Absolutely. Go quiet.
Mm-hmm.
That's so funny. I'm going to pause and invite you into a personal joke with Lindsay and I. Just yesterday, she sent me a meme. It was so funny. I was like, oh dear. And it was, you might think that you're quiet, but the people that get to know you know that you're not really quiet. But if you go quiet, there's a problem. And so we laughed about it because she knows me well. If I've gone really quiet, there's probably a challenge because I'm definitely shutting down. All right. I need to stop and contribute. Yes, shutting down, internalize. Yeah. All right. So I came across this. It's called the window of tolerance. And I think it's really a great thing to bring to a team meeting and just to talk about, like, how do we as individuals, when we get into a stressful situation, how do we respond? Right. So, Lindsay, again, I'm going to invite you to please put a line, because we're going to drop chat here in a moment. And so, the window of tolerance, if we have really great communication, the goal is that we stay in that window. And so we don't have curled up toes or curled up fingers. We're not playing with our neck. We are very comfortable. We're very open. This is where the creativity, this is where we show up as our best. So think about the window of tolerance. We want that window to stay wide open. We want the window to be really, really big. But in toxic environments, or when we have negative Nellies and Neds, the window tends to get a lot smaller. And actually the windows will even start to close in. And when that happens, we have a physical response. And so the window of tolerance will help us to identify, do we fight when we're in that? Do we freeze, flee, or fawn? Now, fawn was a new one to me. I'd heard of flight, freeze, or flee, but I hadn't heard fawn before. And so as I was doing this research, fawn is we kind of like just agree with the situation to make it better, even if it's all of our own personal needs are not being met. We will seek to please others instead of doing what really needs to be done, right? So a lot of times negative and Nellies will do that back channeling, and nobody wants to be on the negative Nellies bad side or Neds. And so we get into that fawn and we kind of walk on eggshells, right? And so what I want you to do in the chat right now, if you feel comfortable, you've been very vulnerable so far. It's been amazing to read your chat. What is your go-to? Do you fight? Do you like, I'm gonna fight with you? Or do you freeze? Flee, I'm out of here. I'm a runner, so I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna find the most comfortable way to get out. And that's why Lindsay jokes with me. She's like, she's going quiet. Well, she has just exited the conversation. She is out in the parking lot already thinking about her next vacation. And so we joke about that, the two of us, because as writing a book, we had to create some norms ourselves and figure out how we interact with one another. And so it's just really good practice to know what your teammates are like what is their natural go-to. I see some that fight, some that flee with me. You're going to join me in the parking lot.
Can I share a couple that are great, Piper? I think this is
Absolutely, Lindsay.
powerful. If it benefits the students, I fight.
Ooh.
And acknowledging, though, at the same time that if not, I may fawn. And another, just have to call it out. She's gonna flee. Call me Springsteen, baby. I was born to run.
That's right.
I relate.
Yes, but the truth is we must fight for our students, right?
Mhm.
So I think this is where it's really important for us to start thinking about team norms so that we can all stay in the window of tolerance. In our chapter around the habit of avoiding negative Nellies and Neds, it's really about being proactive. And so we have a whole couple of exercises and reflective practices for you and your team. Bringing forward this window of tolerance is one of them, so that we just have conversations around like what happens to you, and so that I can notice that about you and try to draw you back into the conversation as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead, Lindsay, to the next slide. You're doing great. I want you to pause now and think about the opposite. So, what did you feel like when you had a highly effective meeting or team? What was your physical, emotional, or mental experience? Go ahead and drop those in the chat. What did that feel like and look like? Relief, energizing. I can sleep. You feel inspired.
We want to do more, I bet. Yeah.
Supported, excited, validated. That's about like you must have felt like your voice was seen, heard, and valued.
Quality energy was exchanged. Yes.
Yeah. Engaged and creative. You felt effective, right? And maybe the time, I'm somebody that I really value being highly effective and efficient. So I'm really in my window if there's an agenda, if everyone's voice is being heard. Like I feel really like, okay, I was effective and efficient today, and I'm like gonna just be able to conquer the world. So this is incredible. And I want to thank you guys for being vulnerable. I love the confident one there as well. So this is the invitation here then is that we spend time in this SEL space of recognizing working with other adults can be hard, especially if there is a negative Nelly or Ned on the team. And so this is really about being proactive and having this activity with your team so that you can have these courageous conversations, so that you can show up and be exactly what you've just named. You can be confident, you can be effective, you feel more creative, right? Thanks, Lindsay. You can go on to the next one. Another thing about being proactive, especially one of the things I've noticed a lot, not only as a teacher, as an educational leader, and then also as somebody that has spent a lot of time in schools the last 3 years, is that those environments that are being proactive in places like shared spaces like the teacher's lounge. I'm just going to name it the teacher's lounge, right? I remember as a young teacher, I would overhear teachers talking very poorly about other teachers or students, not all of them, right? Like one teacher, that negative Nelly or Ned, was like going to town and being super negative and taking over the conversation. And so the places that I've noticed a very positive culture in the school have been very purposeful, intentional, and proactive in setting up those common shared spaces. Some of the things that I've noticed are like a staff kudos board, so shouting out one another and keeping it positive. They've had gratitude jars where there's been like little notes that you can write in and then drop those in. It just that attitude of gratitude really can change that negative culture very quickly. I've seen joke of the week, trivia cards at teachers' tables, monthly staff birthday bulletin boards, inspirational teacher or positive quote boards. One of my favorite recently has been, would you rather this or this? So like, would you rather, they've just been creative. And every single week, the teachers have little like name cards on this marker board, and they do like a voting. Would you rather read fiction or nonfiction? Would you rather eat at whatever restaurants are popular in the towns? So just being really proactive in those common shared spaces in order to create positive conversations, and just being mindful and proactive. These are all habits that we can work together to help eliminate that negative culture, the negative talk that goes on in our shared spaces.
Love it, Piper. And I've been right there with you, seeing some of those in action and evidence, and going back to the conversations that you described for collaborative groups. I've seen such powerful outcomes from your work with that, particularly in PLCs, when we think about the delicacy of the topics that we're speaking of, and the sensitivity and the feelings that people describe there around shutting down and just withdrawing from those experiences. How do we shift those practices, eliminating the negativity? I love that. So thank you for your examples as well in the chat. We're going to move towards an opportunity at the end here for folks to ask us any particular questions. You can post questions into the chat, and we're going to be having an opportunity to answer those. But we want to invite you to connect with us beyond just the webinar today. Social media is an easy avenue. We're both accessible. LinkedIn, Piper hasn't ventured into the Twitter sphere space yet, maybe for the better, but I'm on there. And we love to have conversations with you, connect with you, hear about your own work in these areas as you consider the habits when the book does come out. Now, we will eventually be offering a guided book study in the spring. That's a simple opportunity there. That is a bit.ly link or a QR code that you could use to just simply share your contact information. The only purpose that we will use it for is to get back with you about the scheduling and arrangements for a book study. And from there, that also will be coming out. Corwin will communicate with you as well. So we'll pause there. We're so grateful for your engagement with us this evening and invite any opportunities for questions and answer time here. So we wrap it up.
We really appreciate you guys joining us today. And we just want to thank you for all the hard work you're doing for our kids. And we hope this book will help you to inspire you and encourage you in such a hard time. Lindsay, I see one question here. It says, where can I find the book link?
Great point. And I don't have it on hand. Maybe by any chance, Margaret, if you have a link for it, but if not, it is available on Corwin's website. And I think folks have had success finding it. Just looking on the website by the title of the book. I should have had a link handy. I love that. For bringing joy and passion and resiliency to educators. We do believe it should be a joyful profession. What are some of the most important pieces of data you think we should start looking at? Ooh, great question.
Ooh, good question.
So in a simple answer, and I will say that digging into the book gives some very explicit ideas in this area, but it a little bit depends, but I'll start with some student learning data. Anything formative assessment that you gather from student learning to certify learning so that you can inform instruction is always powerful. We go into personal uses of data as well in the book, and we're thinking, for example, around this habit of using feedback to continue to grow professionally. We might be, for example, suggesting that you engage in a peer observation, and a colleague would then be able to collect data for you on how many times, for example, that you call on different students in the classroom. That came up as an example of a bias that we may have to help inform your own shifts in your practice in that area too. So I would say starting with student learning, formative assessment data around the standards that you're teaching, you can never go wrong. But consider looking into the books chapter as it comes out, and we'll post lots of examples of those kind of things too on social media to call out powerful examples. We'd love to hear from you all too.
I would like to add with that, Lindsay, too, it's not even just the type of data. It's really trying to find those strengths that our students have and celebrating them. Like, what are their positive outliers of their own data, and making sure kids know what they're doing really well at and what they need to continue to work on. So I think it's not even just the type of data. It's our mindset, how we use the data to, like you just named our other habit of giving the feedback, right? Like, kids are dying for that feedback. And so how do we do that? So thinking about your mindset, and do you inspect what you expect with the data? Do you give that feedback to your students? And then the data that we should be collecting on ourselves, like how am I doing, and having our peers come and maybe doing some of the observation about, like, how do we call on kids, or how am I presenting the data? How long do I talk? That kind of thing. So there's all sorts of data that we can collect, but it's about being intentional with how we use it.
And my favorite phrase I've ever learned for Piper too is to get curious.
Yeah, we do. We have to get curious.
That treasure. When we find powerful pieces of data, go find out what are the powerful practices that helped us get there. Thanks to Corwin for hosting us and for putting this book out into the world. We're so excited to be on the team with you. And
yes, it has been an honor, and we're just so honored that everyone joined us today to learn more about it.